Hey friends, this is Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous, where we discuss pop culture through the lens of race or gender, and sometimes both. I'm your host, Julia Washington, and on today's show, we are discussing Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Bedknobs and Broomsticks was first released in December of 1971 and stars Angela Lansbury and David Tomlinson and so many others. But before we dive in, let me introduce you to my guest. Eunice Brownlee has spent her life telling stories across many mediums. As a multi-passionate creative, she has used photography, marketing, writing, and public speaking to connect her message to the world. Because the heart of building community begins with sharing stories, Eunice uses her stories to connect, heal, and change the world. Eunice spends time teaching others the craft of story in her speaking and writing practice. She has coached speakers in telling their stories with Women Speak and TEDx Folsom. All right, 916-ish. Eunice's writing has been published in Jennifer Magazine, Motherscope, and Spoken Black Girl, to name a few. When she's not doing any of the above, she can be found seeking her next passport stamp and drinking wine. And I love the drinking wine part too. I am so excited she's here because we are digital friends. We have not met in real life, but we chat in the DMs on Instagram. And I love it when people that I actually talk to show up. Welcome to the show, Eunice.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny to me that when I was reading this, it reminded me that we haven't actually met IRL. We are totally at 100% Zoom friends.
Yeah.
For now. One of these days, out to Modesto and we'll hang out and drink wine. Apparently.
Or, if you find yourself in the Sacramento region again, it's not that far from me. I can totally drive up, and I have a ton of friends in Sacramento. I mean, we have mutual friends.
Multiple levels of mutual friends.
Mm-hmm. We'll just have to do like let's see everyone's legs in real life party, because we all have legs, but we don't really see them.
Oh my gosh, that reminds me of the funniest thing so Julia and I met through a community that is no longer Dear Grown Ass Women. And one of the Dear Grown Ass Women that I went to meet in Portland, her very first comment, the day that I was flying in, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I get to see how tall you are." And I'm like, "What?" And she said, "You realize that all of these Zoom relationships, we have no idea. All we've seen are people's shoulders and heads." And I was like, I hadn't even thought about it at that point, but I was like, oh my gosh. And turns out she's shorter than I thought. Like, I was like, oh, she's probably the same height as me.
Yeah.
And she's like 5'4" and I'm 5'8". And I was like, oh, now I understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, that's so funny. I have a friend that I also know only digitally. She lives on the East Coast. She was supposed to visit, but airline drama, because the airlines be drama. The trip didn't happen, but she asked me, she was like, "I picture you being like 5'9". And I was like, nope. It's like, maybe cute. I have 5'9" energy, but I am a solid 5'5".
I wonder what that is about, like the way that we present ourselves in this little square that makes us feel bigger than we are.
That's a good question. I don't know. I know it's like we perfectly curate what we look like from the shoulders up on purpose. I mean, not me recently, because I've discovered overalls and I've decided that's all I'm living in.
Oh my gosh, this guy in my apartment building, I saw him yesterday and he was wearing the cutest overalls and they had like little paisley prints on them. And I meant, like, if it wasn't for the fact that my dog was barking his face off, I would have been like, dude, where did you get those? Because I need a pair too. They were so cute.
I love that. I love that. I do need some ones for winter, because my summer ones are like a linen cotton blend and it's perfect for when it's like a bajillion degrees.
Yeah.
But that will not keep me warm in the winter.
Will not.
Okay, so I love to pull the Google summaries of the films we review or the TV shows we review, because everybody Googles everything and we trust Google, even though maybe we shouldn't.
Maybe not everything that's on Google is true.
Maybe not everything's on Google is true. So here's what Google had to say about Bedknobs and Broomsticks. During the Battle of Britain, Miss
Eglantine. There's a whole song about her.
I know. Why did I struggle with
song about her name? It's hilarious. I'm like, okay, my name is Eunice, of course. Like, I can relate to having the weird ass name, but
I literally have never seen it written out before, I think. So it threw me.
I've never seen it. I've never heard it. I don't know.
Because they always call her Miss Price. I don't even know if I'm trying to think about, do they even call her Eglantine at all ever in the film?
Yeah, they do when she meets the professor, and then he sings a whole song about her name.
That's right. You just said that.
And I'm like, what? But what?
And I loved that song.
Like riffing on it.
And I still didn't remember. Oh gosh.
But yeah, you're right. Other than that, she never says her name. It's just Miss Price.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, that was topic number 1 on accident. Okay. Miss Eglantine Price, played by Angela Lansbury, a cunning witch in training, decides to use her supernatural powers to defeat the Nazi menace. She sets out to accomplish this task with the aid of 3 inventive children who have been evacuated from the London Blitz. Joined by Emilius Brown, David Tomlinson, the head of Miss Price's witchcraft training correspondence school, the crew uses an enchanted bed to travel to a fantasy land and foil encroaching German troops. So that's the setup. I feel like that's pretty accurate. Sometimes Google says stuff and you're just like, Google, did you and I watch the same movie? Because my summary would have been different.
Well, and I also I think that I know that we'll actually talk about this, but I think that my child brain would have totally written a different summary of that.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I believe it. So at the time of its release, Roger Ebert had this to say, and buckle up, everybody, because y'all know how we feel about Roger Ebert over here. R.I.P., I guess. Here we go. Quote, "The Disney people seem to be drifting farther and farther away from a sympathetic understanding of what kids really enjoy at the movies. Sometimes they try to pass off their sad, dumb movies as family entertainment, so that if kids don't like it, maybe the older members of the family will. This is a pathetic sort of self-deception on their part, I guess. The Disney organization is worst when it makes family entertainment and best when it sticks to pure, simple, charming fantasy." End quote. So that's how he felt about this movie. Which is what it is.
It is what it is. But also, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday when I mentioned that we were going to be recording this. I'm like, who was like, yeah, let's make another movie about Nazis. Like, The Sound of Music came out in 1965.
Mm-hmm.
That was about that. And it was like a family film. Remember when it used to come on TV and it was like this big to-do? It would be this 2-night special on, I think it was CBS probably. And like we'd make popcorn and they would play it once a year. And I remember when it came out on VHS tape and we had both of the tapes.
Because it was a ridiculously long movie. It's my favorite holiday tradition, actually. Sound of Music. They air it the Sunday before Christmas every year.
Oh, okay. But that's another movie about the Nazis, right? Like, is this what people
and the Von Trapp
in the late 60s?
Apparently, and because I guess it's like 30 years-ish later, 25 years-ish later. And the Von Trapp family, the real one, is like a generation earlier in real life, if I remember correctly.
Oh, really?
So there's like serious creative license to put it during World War II or like pre-World War II, because like we're not full-fledged war yet. Like Germany's just invading everybody in Europe right now.
I just remember my 6th grade teacher, who had been my pen pal since 6th grade, so over 30 years, she had gone to hear them sing when she went to Austria a couple decades ago. And she's like, to be honest, they're not that good. And I was like, oh, shots fired. Okay.
I mean, our standards were different, I guess.
Yeah, but like
for the Greatest Generation, right? That's the Greatest Generation, technically, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. But I guess, I don't know, like I said, with my 11-year-old brain, didn't like the whole Nazi storyline, World War II invasion piece, like it just didn't quite register the way that it does for me now. It's like I was looking at the opening credits and it's like this whole cartoon of the things, and you even have like the freaking Nazi flag flying through the credits, the swastika and everything, and I'm like, wait, what? I don't understand. Granted, it's not like it's a Nazi sympathizer film for people who don't understand that that's not what we're saying.
Right. It is like not.
This is about the British troops who were defending their own lands against the German invasion that was happening in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
But like, yeah. And I don't know, like, it's so funny rewatching it from the context of, hey, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So were you 11 the first time you saw it then, or how old were you?
Yeah, so I was 11 or 12. So, fun fact about me, I used to live in rural New Mexico. And by rural, I mean like there were no people. Literally lived in the middle of nowhere. And so we didn't have TV. We didn't have, like, the only way that anybody in town, the whole population of the town was maybe like 95 people.
Oh my
Very
gosh.
small. Like the surrounding areas was 300 people. My class was 18 kids. There was
That's
one
so
school for the whole, like basically the whole county, and kids got bused in like an hour to 2 hours to come to school because there were no people. And so the only people who had TV were those who had the money to have those giant satellite dishes, the ones that were
mm-hmm.
like 8 feet wide and took up half your yard, which was
Mm-hmm.
like hardly anybody. So we didn't have TV, we didn't have radio, we didn't have, so way before cable. Like, this town was just so small. So my grandpa used to, he lives in Savannah, he used to videotape the free weekend on Disney Channel and then mail
Love
us
that.
tapes. And so every so often, like, he would just send us like a set of 6 or 8 tapes that he had spent the whole weekend just recording for us. And this was one of the movies that was on one of those tapes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would send back the tapes that we didn't want to be recorded over, but this was one that stuck with us. So I was 11 or 12.
That's so interesting that it is one of the ones that stuck with you, because it definitely feels like, because there's a lot of animation involved, because it's got that animation slash real human situation going on that Disney pretty much was famous for in the 60s and 70s. And I'm trying to think if they did it in the 50s too, but all the movies that come to mind are from the 60s and 70s, right? Like Mary Poppins is like, I think 1964, and then this movie is 71, and so on and so on. So like, it's so interesting, like seeing how, like, and what am I trying to say? Because I'm trying to remember what I thought when I was a kid. My only memory of this movie as a child, Disney did these sing-along tapes. Do you
Somebody told
remember
me about
those?
that. And
And
it was the animated part when they went to
when they first
the
got to,
island in New Boo Boo. Yeah.
yep, when they first, and they're like, oh, we landed in the ocean. So that song. So when that song came on screen this time around, I was like, I still know every word. Like, of course I do, because my mother's respite was putting on those Disney tapes for me.
Yeah.
And it was on the one that had the blue cover. And the one with the blue cover, in my opinion, had all of the best Disney songs compared to the one with the red cover. Anybody who remembers these and wants to fight me on it, let's go.
My
Just
gosh.
kidding.
Yeah. I remember those sing along tapes. We didn't have that one because we had the movie, but I feel like we had some of the Little Mermaid ones and
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, and I feel like most people like this, I feel like this is a lesser known Disney movie because most people, I feel like, only know it because of that sing along tape.
Right.
And they don't know the whole movie. And like, I should have actually clocked it, but fun fact, like, that the animated piece of that movie is only like 20 minutes of the whole film.
Right. And this is like an hour and 57-minute film too. So
Yeah.
it's kind of
So it's
long.
not, and I don't remember, it's been so many times, so long since I've seen Mary Poppins, but I don't remember if that was the same with that one, if it was just a short piece of animation.
No, I think
I
they just kind
remember,
of they wove it in. Like there's the scene where Dick Van Dyke dances with the penguins. That's the one that I
yeah,
remember.
one I remember.
And I'm trying to think of other scenes that I don't remember. Mary Poppins wasn't really one that I watched a lot. Like, out of all the movies that were like kid content oriented, we were definitely leaned to animation in our house from Disney.
Well, and like the other thing is Disney didn't do, like, they did the animated movies and they did the like the combination animation live action films, but they also had a whole lot of non-animated films. Like, one of my favorites, that the only place I've found it on the internet, it's not even on the Disney Channel, like there's a bootleg version of it on YouTube that is, and my sister and I watched it a couple of years ago just because we were trying to tell my nephew about it, and the storyline is so ridiculous. and it's called Bejeweled. And it's basically about this woman who is hired by she works for this museum to bring this like set of crown jewels, and basically like her box gets switched at the airport, and so they go on this whole thing to try and figure it out. And this is another one of those movies that we saw from the VHS tapes that my grandpa sent us, and it ended up like maybe it was on the same tape as this, and that's why I've watched both of these movies a bajillion times.
Yeah.
Like that was a really fun movie that I never would have thought that it was a Disney movie, because Disney is so closely related to this idea of animated film.
Right. The other thing that kind of shocked me a little bit too for 1971 was how like Angela Lansbury's character is full on like, I'm trying to become a witch, y'all. Like that's the goal. And that
in
kind
England,
of
no less.
Yeah. And like
that, like we have our state church.
And like so that shocked me a little bit too, because I was like, well, obviously that makes sense that she would want to become like she's becoming a witch, because then how do you explain anything else in this film? Like there's a literal bed knob that they plug into the bed frame that takes them wherever they wish, right?
Because
like
they put a spell on it.
Correct. So it's like, how else are you going to make that happen unless somebody puts a spell on it, right? Like there's so many things where it's like, so let's get into that, like the takeaways as a kid, watching it as a kid versus watching it as an adult, because there's so many things now where I'm just like, this makes so much more sense now that I'm watching it through grown-up eyes.
Well, obviously the magic piece has to be the core element, right?
Right.
Because the whole thing is kicked off by her wanting so badly to be a witch, and the movie starts out with her getting her first broom, and she's got this this certification from this school from Professor Brown and Professor Emeritus Brown. Like it's such a fancy sounding name, and then you learn once you meet this character that basically all of his contemporaries see him as this failed magician and nothing more than that, and just like this washed up guy. He's not really a witch. She really wants to be a witch. He's just like, smoke and mirrors dude.
Right.
Which I feel like watching it back now, like not even as an adult, like when Disney Plus came out, this was like totally the first movie I watched. I'm not kidding. This is how like integral this movie has been in my childhood. But like now, like in this like more feminist world, I think you just went and saw Barbie this weekend, as did I, but like
3 times. Just need everybody to know I saw it 3 times opening weekend.
Oh my god. But like thinking about this woman who, like, the misogyny of his comments, but then she's realizing like this guy has put him out to be this huge thing that he's actually not. He's totally a fraud. And like she actually understands magic far more than he ever does. So there's like this subtle feminist undertone in this whole thing, but also they set her up at the beginning to be this, this spinster who lives with her cat in this giant house. Like one of the first things the kids say when they walk in is like, well, who lives here with you? And she's like, this place suits my needs. And she's kind of ashamed by this little kid. And I'm like, wow, what a shithead. Like he's only like 10 or 11 and he's already just like, what, don't you need a man?
Right.
And she's like, me and my cat are good, thank you.
Yeah.
But and then like toward the total spoilers, but like towards the end when he takes the star from the lion, and then he's like, let me hold on to it because women have a way of losing things, and then he totally loses it, or the magic makes it disappear or whatever. But like there's just all of these, and of course it's 1971, so I have to think about it. But like as a kid I didn't see any of that. For me it was all about the magic. It was like oh my gosh, like it was about the opening up your imagination to the possibility that A, there could be other worlds, B, magic exists, and C, you can use said magic to transport yourself to wherever you want to be. And like the fact that they chose, like she had the broomstick, but they didn't use the broomstick. It was the bed that was the transporter, which was such an odd decision of like, oh yeah, let's use a bed because that totally makes sense. Let's put all of these children in a bed with grown-ups that they don't know. Right. And send them off into an unknown land.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the other part that's interesting that kind of falls in line a little bit with what you're saying is when she gets the broom and she's trying to like make it work. And the instructions even tell her like a lady rides side saddle, essentially is what it
Yes.
says. And
Yes.
she's trying to ride side saddle and she's like, this doesn't work. I'm going to not. And then basically
Like,
takes
it's okay if I'm
control.
not proper.
Yeah, and I loved that because it's like side saddle, man, every woman deserves a fucking award for riding side saddle. That shit is hard. Like you can't control the like not that you're trying to control the creature, but like it's harder to hang on when you have nothing to grip with. Like
Right. Exactly.
and
Right.
that stuck out to me this time too cuz I was like, yeah, girl, tell those bitches I'm not riding side saddle. Like, fuck
Listen,
you.
this doesn't work for me.
This doesn't work for me. I need to win. Um And there was a lot of like, I didn't realize how much physicality was involved. I forgot about the physicality. So I looked up how old Angela Lansbury was when this movie came out. She was 47.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
She's older than I thought she was. But then again, like I grew up watching Murder, She Wrote. And so I feel like, and that was filmed in the 80s. So she
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that old. But for whatever reason, in my brain, granted, I thought my kindergarten teacher was 83 and she was 30 something. But in my brain, like she was very old. Like she
Mm-hmm.
was in her 80s when she did Murder, She Wrote. And so um I don't know, but she 47, but she doesn't look that old in this movie.
Mm-mm.
She's definitely portrayed as this single spinster who's living out in the country all by herself. And then this is my other thing. Like I know that there was and during World War II, because I'm a huge World War II buff, which I'm wondering if that's why this movie like
It sparked your
it
interest.
sparked something in me, or if I don't know, but like realizing as an adult that this movie was about World War II and the German invasion into Britain, I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, huh, interesting. Anyway, but like she doesn't even like kids, but like their whole thing was they were evacuating the kids out of London. And so many of them ended up as orphans because their parents stayed back to fight the war and all this stuff. But it's like, here you have this woman, just because she's got space, she's not even actually asked if she wants to take them all. She's just like, well, the minister has ordered this. So boom, you're taking these children. And she's,
Right.
yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. No, you don't want these children with me. And it's funny because I feel like if they would have known about her witchcraft stuff, they
They
probably
probably,
wouldn't have let the kids go there. They probably would
right.
have like, oh no, we're not putting any children in there, lest you groom them or something.
Right. It's interesting how in like if this were like real life, if you will, and people would have known about her, she probably would have been an outcast for her witchcraft practice.
Yeah.
But everyone just kind of loves her because she's quirky and different. Like she did a really good job at like keeping the witchcraft of it all secret.
Yes.
Um and then even when like the kids towards the end, and we're a spoiler filled show, so don't feel bad for spoiling anything, especially because this movie came out in 1971, so it's like
Yeah, like if you
y'all.
haven't watched it, that's on you, dude.
That's on you. um Especially when and then this growth that she has with like, oh, I actually really enjoyed the children because they aided in her mission of trying to figure out, because the spell book that she uses, or that Professor Brown has been ripped in half. So she's trying to figure out what's this other piece of this spell. And so that sort of sets them on this mission that sort of leads them into the animation imaginary land. And so it's funny because they're so helpful. Like the little one has that magazine
Mm-hmm.
that has all the
Yeah.
details about it, and like he's like, well, it's all right here, and and then by the end of it she's like, oh, I like these kids because they helped me. Like
And I
she
would
like,
even say that it's not all the kids. I think it's just Paul. Like
I
he's
think
the
it
one
is,
that's
yeah.
into it, and he's reading about it, he's sharing about it, and I think that that's why he was the one bestowed with the magic powers to make the knob work.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other kids were like, Paul, you're getting in the way. And like how many of us heard that growing up, right? Like kids should be seen and not heard. And he's the little one, and so he's kind of like shoved to the side and like do what you're told. And he's like, no, I have a voice here, I have the information, I can be helpful. And so
Yeah.
it's really like, he really is the hero of the story because he totally saves the day.
He totally saves the day. And he was so adorable. I think the other thing too that struck me was how when Professor Brown was like, "Oh, you got that to work? You got that spell to work?" Like, and then he admitted to being like, "Well, I changed some things around a little bit because I made it like better, but it was
No, like it exposed him for the fraud that he was, right?
yes." And I just loved how she was like so serious about her studies that she like figured it out and was able to like be a successful witchcraft practicer. And I loved that. Again, still kind of shocked that a 1970s film would be about a woman practicing witchcraft. Like that
Yeah.
still floors me.
And then it was or maybe it was acceptable because what she did was it was innocuous with witchcraft, right? Like she wasn't using it to do anything except for fight Nazis, which is a noble cause, of course, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
if she would have been using it in other ways, maybe that would have been different, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I still like the more I think about it, the more I just think this whole like World War II Nazis storyline is so fucking weird.
Well, you're not the only one, because when I went back to Ebert's review, so he originally gave this film 2.5 stars, and he mentions that the film doesn't have much heart. He also mentions that he loves the animation meets reality technique that is the magic of Disney. But he thinks that the entire film should have just lived in Nobu land. I can't say it fast. I'm sorry. And like, so okay, not comparing it to films today, that's not the point. But I'm like, after reading that article or his review and then watching it again, I was like, but how would you, like, if it all existed in the animated world, how would this movie even work?
It couldn't. Like I was thinking because I read his review before I rewatched it with that in mind. And it's like the whole purpose that they went there was to get the last piece. They had to get the Star of Astaroth. They had to get that last piece of the spell that wasn't in the second half of the book that they thought it was going to be in. And then they meet all these animals and these characters that are like a leftover remnant from somebody else's failed magic spells or successful magic spells, I guess, however you want to look at it.
Right.
But like, and then that whole soccer match was pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
But like, I don't understand how there could have been more to it. They're like,
it's like you have to send them somewhere, right? Like they can't just exist. Like when he wrote that, I was like, how did you win a Pulitzer?
I don't like, I mean, because I was even thinking about like in the movie Up, how they end up looking for the falls and then they crash or whatever, and they're in this place with the dogs that talk and they're searching for the birds, and that's a whole world that's outside of their world, sort of, right? But it's part of the adventure.
Right.
And in this way, this one is kind of part of the adventure too, but like they had a mission, like there was a purpose for them to be there. There was a purpose for them to travel. And if you take away that purpose and set the whole thing in that world, it makes no fucking sense.
Right. And not in a fun way either, because like the whole backdrop of fighting the Nazis and her having these kids evacuated, like that's the secondary part of the story. Like the whole, like her goal to become a fully fledged witch is, in my opinion, the theme of the film. Like that's the whole movie. Everything else just is kind of like there as a vehicle to get her there. Right.
Yeah.
Like
opportunities for her to practice her craft.
Correct. And so like I spent the last few days trying to think about like what would be even a good alternative. Like how could you even tell this film in Nobu land? Like my brain couldn't do it. And I don't know if that's because we've been watching this movie our entire lives, and so we're like, this story makes sense to our brains, but it just was one of those moments where it was just like, then Roger Ebert, what did you think should have happened besides, like, once you get there,
right?
How does this work? Because did you miss that the whole point is for her to become a fully fledged like happy practicing witch. I mean, and fall in love because Brown and her have a thing. And yes, keep the kids because she's decided the kids are okay. But that to me wasn't my takeaway. My takeaway was like, she's like, I have to finish this. I started something, I need to finish it.
I gotta finish it. And she's like, because the whole movie opens with her getting her broom and
Yes.
her apprentice witch level, and here's the last, and there's a piece missing. The whole reason she goes searching him out is because he totally leaves out part of the spell, that final spell that he needs or she needs. And I don't think that he ever expected anybody to take this project seriously enough that they would call him out on the fact that, hey, you didn't actually give me everything. And she totally does. She's like,
Right.
where's the rest of this spell? And that's how they meet. And so I don't, like, from a storytelling perspective, like, they don't get to the Isle of Nabumbu until halfway through the movie.
Right.
The rest of it is all set up for how they get there, but you're learning more about her witchcraft journey. You're learning more about his whole little like con artist gig.
Yeah.
And all the things that he's doing to make money with the backdrop of the war, and everybody's evacuating London because London's getting bombed like crazy by the Germans, and these like those bookstore, like,
Yeah.
bibliophile that I am, I've never had a knife pulled on me at a bookstore. I'm just saying.
Could you imagine if that were a thing? Like, book people are probably the kindest, most helpful, most generous people on the planet. So like when that happened, I was like, nope.
Wait a second, we can't share this? No, of course not. I have to keep this for myself. And I just can't see two bookish people like go throwing down over a first edition. I just can't. It's rare for we're like, nope, we're both gonna take half of this book, it's fine.
Yeah.
So like these two shady characters just crack me up because they just don't really quite make sense, but they kind of do, because you kind of get this illusion that like they would totally use these powers for evil if they could use them. And so I think that makes it even more special of her being the heroine here, and outside of that, like, she's defying this whole like women belong in the home and women can't do anything, because she's the only one who's successful in using these spells and this magic, even though they were taught to her by men. She's like, I'll show you, thanks.
Yeah, which I loved. It's like she's just so matter of fact about the whole thing, which is a piece of it that I really loved, because her determination really keeps them going through the film. And like the scene where you're talking about where they like have the knives pulled on them, I love how the guy is like, well, how are you going to get out? The door's locked. And it's like, sir, you also practice magic. How do you not have imagination? Like,
Exactly.
and then they disappear. And it was just so, the whole thing I thought was delightful and fun. And like, I do think it's a little long. So I think that, you being 11, seeing it for the first time was probably the right move, because I can't see a 4-year-old staying engrossed in this in the way that like other sort of Disney movies capture little kids.
Yeah, because I mean, there's not that much magic in it when you really
Right.
put it down. Like, there's the little bit at the beginning when she learns how to use the broom, and then she does the spell on the knob that Paula is able to make work. Other than that, the magic just becomes their vehicle, their mode of transportation.
Yeah. And then at the end,
it is World War II, but then they have like all of these medieval armor that are coming together, and it's like, where did these all come from? I don't understand. But then it makes me laugh because it's kind of this tie back to that opening scene when the guy's painting the road signs so that nobody knows where anything is.
Yeah.
And then you see this little army corps marching up of these geriatric soldiers. And it's like, oh, okay. Like, for some reason, these geriatric soldiers and these like antique suits of armor somehow make sense because it makes sense. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Is there, Disney?
And when I think sometimes I'm like, okay, not poor England, because they're colonizers. With that said, there are moments sometimes that I'm just like, gosh, do you think British actors are tired of like playing like things from like the the dark ages or like medieval times or like something in that like those types of period pieces, because like I feel like that's a lot of what America thinks of when they think of England, is like you're either like pre-England before it's established, or your World War II, and that's it.
Yeah. But all of that is all centered on war, which makes sense for them being called. I mean, but even you look at their culture and how much of it is around decorated soldiers.
Yeah.
Like it blows my mind every single time I watch anything royal, that like the sashes and the ribbons and the regalia and like just and I'm like, is this necessary? Like, really? You have to be all decked out so everybody knows your place in this world.
Right.
Everywhere you go, for everything.
For everything, for every living blessed thing. I didn't realize you were a history buff. I kind of love that. I didn't know that. So now like I can share things with you.
Yeah, I like history a lot. I like historical fiction, but World War II, for whatever reason, is like the period of history that has been so fascinating to me my entire life.
I
don't
think
know why.
Well, so I've been thinking about that a lot all the time for whatever reason, because like I feel like World War II was sort of the last war that existed where everyone understood who the enemy was.
Mm-hmm.
Like every war after that, it was like, did you really need to do that?
Right.
Like, do you really think that's an enemy? Like,
does that make sense?
Like, why are you invading? Like, they didn't do anything. They're just trying to exist. There's a lot of that when I look at like any wars post World War II. I think it was a really big, I mean, obviously it's a world phenomenon because it's a world war, but I think there's a lot of like cultural events that really kicked off too in that era.
There's a lot of cultural events and a lot of innovation. Like one of my favorite things about that era is like you think about the Enigma machine and the code crackers and like so much of the technology that we have today because of the innovations that were happening. And I grew up in northern Arizona, so right miles from the Navajo reservation. So it's very strange. The Burger King in Kayenta, Arizona has actually like a whole World War II Navajo code talkers monument. Like
wow.
It's not a monument, it's like a museum. It's like a museum display, but it's inside, which is so weird. But anyway, like learning just the ways that all of these different communities around the world were really innovating. And like obviously everybody knows that Oppenheimer also came out. And, let's not forget all of the ways that they completely trashed the native lands in New Mexico and displaced people there to test these bombs that they created there. But like, so many of the things, good and bad, that we have today happened in this like 10-year period. It's very weird and strange and fascinating.
There's this book series that I'm obsessed with called Maisie Dobbs. Are you familiar with it? She is, the author is Jacqueline Winspear. She's from England. She is a psychologist and an investigator, Maisie Dobbs is. And it starts in 1929. There's like 15 or 16 books at this point. So she served during World War I. And there's a flashback in the first book to her time as a nurse during World War I. And Jacqueline Winspear has family who served during World War I. So that's kind of what inspired her to write this series. So she's got a ton of research. I mean, it's amazing how she cranks out for a while. It wasn't every year because she does a ton of research on each one. And now we are in book, like I said, 15 or 16. I have them stacked over here. And we're starting to enter the point in history where World War II is looming. So she works as a psychologist and investigator, and she does like contract work with Scotland Yard, but also like people can hire her to investigate things. And she uses like different techniques. She's very intuitive in the way that she solves these crimes or whatever it is that she's been hired to do. her nurse background really comes in handy as well. It's so interesting to be in the mind of a woman in 1929 who's fighting stereotypes, who's like, her father was some kind of monger, but I forget what kind. Like there's a something
Wasn't a
monger.
warmonger?
Like no, like
Fishmonger?
I can't remember now, but like they allude to her mom being part, and I'm saying it this way because that's how it's referenced in the book, but they allude to like her mom was being part of the gypsy culture in England, and like stepping away from that, and like so each book has a specific case she's following, plus there's like little second, B lines too. And it's so good. If you choose to read them in order, because things happen, and if you read them out of order, it's like you can't really, it's a whole thing. Somebody once said, oh, it doesn't matter if you read them in order, and a friend of mine did that, and she's like, absolutely wrong, because I was
Turns
so
out
upset. Yeah, she was like, and Jacqueline Spears very mindful of that. You read the first one and you're like, who is this chick? Like, why? Like, you're just kind of like, I don't know. Like, some people love it, some people don't. But then as you get through the series, you learn more about Maisie, you learn more about what makes her tick, you learn more about, her feelings and emotions, you learn more about what she went through during World War One. And then now that her best friend's kids are like the whole mindset at the end in 1921 was like, this is never happening again. We can go on and living our lives. Da, da, da. And then people have kids and everything's great. And then you fast forward like 10 years, or not even 10 years, really. It's like 1933, I think, is the first invasion, right? That Germany did.
Yep.
And they just have these like very like passive conversations around Hitler and what's happening in Europe, and you kind of get, it brings that human level to it in a way that I haven't seen really in historical fiction
Sounds cool.
It's really cool. It's a really good series. It's she didn't release one this year, and I'm like, ma'am. But the one she released this year takes a character from the Maisie Dobbs series and is throwing her into the young person in the precipice of World War II kind of stuff. I haven't read it yet because I'm like scared to, because I love that character. So I'm like, I don't know if I can handle her being a main character.
Okay.
Because I care for her.
The info on this series.
I will. It's so good. It's so detailed. It's just so good. I'm like, this should be required reading about like, because she really does get into a lot of history and stuff behind like what soldiers went through during World War I and the aftermath of like how poorly they were cared for. And I was like, man, this could be post the Iraq War, and it went like how poorly, and it's not called PTSD in 1917, right?
That didn't happen until the 80s.
So it's like a lot of that that precursor stuff, she really did her research. And I'm like, now that we're entering into that phase of World War II, I'm just like, this is going to be so stressful, but I'm also going to eat every book she writes up.
That sounds awesome. Well, and I've always been, I've spent more time studying the European theater, but one of my all-time favorite books is Pachinko. And that spans, I think it's actually pre-World War One, because it's actually it's like 4 or 5 generations.
Love that.
Family, but like you learn all about what led up to the Korean War, and why the Koreans and the Japanese hated each other for so many years. And spoiler alert for some people, but it's one of the sons, he's figured out how to pass as Japanese. Korean kid passing in post World War II Japan, and like it's all of these things that, for me as a mixed race person, thinking about even what we've dealt with in our post-war cultures here in the US, like there's so many threads and ties that are completely relatable, that you just see us continue to repeat these patterns throughout history like a bunch of dumbasses. One of the few things that, was it Winston Churchill who actually said that about people who are ignorant to history are doomed to repeat it?
I think so. I don't remember.
I think that's who's credited with it, but I feel like I read somewhere that he wasn't actually the one that
said it. And that I know it's like same with Mark Twain. He's constantly miscredited for quotes all the time. Yeah. But it's, yeah, I love that you love like that time period and have studied it and what have you. And can we maybe safely say it's because of Bedknobs and Broomsticks?
It's possible. It's very possible. Although I saw a funny story, and I am going to take this down to the library and get it scanned to digital, because my friend's dad was going to do this many moons ago and he has since passed away. But when I moved, I found my final History Day tape from 1995, where I can't remember what the theme was that year. But for those people who don't believe that National History Day is a thing, and I'm talking to you, Sarah, it's a thing and it's still a thing. But it was an organization that geeks like me got involved in school. And so it was a thing that everybody nationally had. There was a theme that you had to create a project around this theme. And so I don't remember what the theme was for that year, but we chose to do a project on the Holocaust. And my friend and I did a documentary on the Holocaust. And the fact that my birthday is 420, and the fact that I'm a 15-year-old checking out Mein Kampf and studying Hitler is very strange. I'm sure on paper, until somebody meets me. Oh, that's we weren't expecting that.
Yeah.
But then the funny part about this whole thing is that we told the story of the Holocaust from the perspective of the Nazis and from the perspective of the Jewish prisoners, to understand, because we wanted to understand their experiences. And what, through my research and all the books and the diaries that I had read, was so much of it was just this, like, I'm a soldier of the German army. These were my orders and I was told to do so. And so there was this whole big question about who knew how much, and like, how culpable are you if you're just following orders without the context of what's going on? And, like, really trying to understand how this atrocity happened. But then, so in the film, my friend and I, my friend who is a blonde Polish woman, we each took a role. And because of course I was the one, I played the Nazi. That's who I studied. That's who I played in the film. And so one of my favorite memories of us filming this whole thing was trying to make me white. So like, blackface, totally not cool. Also whiteface, just don't do it. Just don't do it. But we spent hours trying to make me not be Black.
Oh my gosh.
So that I could play a Nazi in this film. And then I'll never forget, the judges are like, so this is an interesting decision that you chose here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, her argument was that she was Polish and it made sense, and I went with it.
That's so funny.
We had fun, but I mean, that was high school, and I think before that I was interested in this period of time, and that's probably how that project came to fruition, because I was my dad, and maybe it was my dad a little bit, because he had a ton of books that I had, he just had them. I don't know why, but he had them, and I was reading them. So
yeah, it's so interesting. I had a conversation when I was reviewing Barbie for another podcast. I was like, I loved that the set was like Palm Springs-esque, because Palm Springs has that mid-century architecture I freaking love. And like, maybe that's why I feel like my vibe is mid-century / Art Deco. Like the Art Deco, I don't know where that comes from, but like the mid-century is like, I think it's because I was constantly playing with like retro Barbies.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Eunice, I am so thankful. Oh, do you have anything else you want to add about this movie before we close out?
No, other than that, like, seriously, if you haven't seen it, like, this is one of those things, like, I think because I watched it so much as a child, I just took for granted that, oh, everybody must have been watching this because my grandpa felt it was important enough to put it on a VHS tape to make sure we didn't miss out on pop culture moments. Like, everything from 1989 to 1991, things that happened, I missed out on. But like, so I play catch up, but I've had this assumption that so many people have known this movie, and most people haven't, other than that sing-along tape. Like, that's what everybody says. Like, well, I remember that one sing-along tape. about that one song.
Yeah.
That cracks me up all the time. I take things for granted, I guess, when you watch the same movie 50,000 times because it's the only one you have.
Right.
It makes sense.
Yeah. I miss the days where you could record stuff off TV and keep it forever and ever and always.
I remember going to LA to visit my aunt in 1995 when the Who Drank the Diet Coke episode of Friends was on. And I was very upset because our VCR Plus didn't pick it up. Like, I'll never forget when VCR Plus came along because it made recording stuff so much easier.
Yeah.
Especially growing up in Arizona where we didn't do a time change. So like that screwed us up so many times because in the summertime we were Pacific time, in the wintertime we were Mountain time. So we always had to figure out when it was actually coming on for us. VCR Plus, it was like you just had to plug in the little code and it did the thing. Such a nerd.
Those were the days though. Because now it's like, whatever. That's a whole other episode I should do to transition
to DVR.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about DVR is like they delete your shit if it gets too full, and you're like, fuck, like I'm not that fast.
That's why I appreciate streaming. But then even that, with all their different contracts, it's like I still haven't ever finished Mad Men because I was watching it and then Netflix lost their contract with it and then it disappeared. And then I found it on Freevee, which is an Amazon product.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to watch it with commercials. And I'm like, I'll wait till somebody else picks it up again.
Which is so dumb because it was on AMC originally and AMC does not do commercials for their original content. Like that's the thing that also bothers me. It's like, if this show wasn't designed for commercials, don't do it. Just don't.
Right.
Eunice, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Where can people, of course, where can people find you, support you, all the things?
I'm on all of the things as Eunice Brownlee. Instagram. Well, I still have a Twitter, but I'm probably gonna delete that. But I'm on Threads now. That's like new Twitter. I guess.
New Twitter. Yeah.
At Eunice Brownlee, Instagram, Threads. That's my website, euniceBrownlee.com. Like, I'm trying to think, like, where else? I'm on the internet. You can Google me and find things.
And I'll link your website in our show notes so people can kind of take a look, especially if they need help with like public speaking or writing coaching or any of those things that you specialize in.
Yeah, that would be awesome because that's been a lot of fun of mine to work with people on helping them tell their own stories.
Love that.